We're taking over the Gaza Strip. We're going to own it. It's going to be so beautiful. We're going to do such great things there. And world people are going to live there. World people. I don't see why they'd want to go back. It's been a total hell and death. We can't repeat history.
My favorite line was, I studied this for many months.
Many months.
I was going to say years, like months.
It's a demolition site.
Like half a semester's worth. So
I have my feelings. You have your feelings.
Yeah,
let's get the guests' feelings.
I would say this. Number one, Trump perhaps inadvertently has exposed the intellectual hypocrisy at the core of the Palestinianism that Dr. Einat Wilf calls, which is if they are refugees and they are displaced, then let's get there somewhere safe so we can dismantle Hamas. Send them to Egypt, send them to Jordan, send them to anywhere that they would desire, which, by the way, should not be controversial because that is what has happened in every single war fought in modern warfare with a refugee population. They are safely evacuated elsewhere while the enemy combatants are taken out. That's number one. And if the response is, well, they're not refugees, and Gaza is their homeland, which is what they're all saying on the left and what the Palestinian Authority has already said, then why is it that they are given refugee status? Why is it that the United States, up until Trump's executive order last week, was spending billions of dollars to propagate this fiction that you are refugees, that you will somehow return with keys in hand to your homes in Jerusalem.
You've also been saying this isn't your home the whole time.
Right, exactly.
You've been saying it's not your home. You said Israel's your home.
So he's inadvertently exposed this catch-22.
I like
Having
that.
said that, in terms of the pragmatic, practical policy solutions, I don't see why is it that the left has taken up a cause whereby, no, we need Gazan civilians, Gazan women, and Gazan children to stay in Gaza underneath terror infrastructures. We need them to stay there and be used as human shields by Hamas. They need to stay there, otherwise it's
the terrorist infrastructure is underneath them, if we're being precise.
Excuse me. I do not understand why that is considered the compassionate or even rational response, where we need to keep civilians in a war zone, even the ones who are asking to leave. That, to me, is not compassionate. That, to me, is not logic. And again, it really exposes that to the far left and to this liberalism of the 21st century. It's not about what's in the best interest of the Palestinian people. It is about the sole eradication of the Jewish state. That is animating their ideology. That is at the heart of their movement. If Israel wants to evacuate them, it's ethnic cleansing. If Israel inadvertently kills them because Hamas has built the terror infrastructures by civilian areas, then Israel is committing genocide. There is no solution that they will ever accept, regardless, unless it has the complete eradication of the Jewish state.
Cooking.
No comment. What can I add to that? I mean, it's been fascinating also that there's all this stuff around this conversation, Israel, Palestine, whenever stuff flares up, like pre-October 7th, there were these flare-ups, and when the conversation always presents itself, there are these sort of amorphous, unidentifiable wrongs, flaws in the conversation. And one of them is, why does everybody default to this pretend delusional common sense position of two-state solution? We need to, like, it's almost like a reflex that we've all collectively decided, whether you agree with it or not, that's what we say. We still stick to it. And what I think is really interesting here is that Trump is one of these figures that says the thing that seems crazy until it's spoken. And then you're like, you know what? Maybe committing to the same old, tired processes and phrases as things keep happening that prove it doesn't work, maybe sticking to those same solutions is not the way to do it. Yeah. And to say it out loud, Trump is just he has this ability to say these things that we all kind of feel out loud. And then you're just like, wow, why should Israel constantly have to be faced with this choice of compromising its security to live alongside neighbors that wish its destruction, no matter what those neighbors do to demonstrate that they wish it, especially when it manifests in violence against Israelis time and time again, rejections of coexistence time and time again. We then reset the clock, and rather than accountability, we go back to the same exact point as if it never happened. This happened. October 7th happened, not because they didn't have a state, but because they did.
And he's such a genius political thinker that this, and you saw with Greenland also. We both do a podcast. Like, I mean, we know how hard it is to say something in a way where people will listen. And so the idea that
you're not being facetious.
I'm not being facetious. Yeah. For the last 70 years, we've been working under this assumption that a two-state solution is the only viable path forward. Right. And I actually think that's not right. And I think there's another way. Like, people tune out. But if you say, why don't we ask them to leave Gaza? All of a sudden, he makes the same exact point in one sentence, and the whole world is listening to it.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant the
He
way he
also
does
said
that.
we gotta take care of them.
Whether or not it happens or not, now people are talking about alternative solutions to a two-state solution.
Yeah.
So
He did it in one
And
sentence.
he did it with empathy towards Palestinian suffering.
I think that
Yeah, the way he phrased it
Sure.
wasn't punitive. Like, I think that's
Well,
intentional.
It forces
He
you
said,
to-
"Well, we're going to build it. It's going to be beautiful." Like, it's Trumpian style, but he said it from an empathetic position of why would they want to go back there? Most politicians would say, "We will work out a solution that's awkward." But it's hell.
It forces you to make the argument against it, which is hard to
Yes.
do.
Yes.
It goes to the core of what Trump said in his inauguration speech, which he very much sees himself as this peacemaker. He's someone who makes deals. He's someone who brings two sides together. So I agree with you. It actually did come from a sense of sympathy, and we want to rebuild Gaza so it can be, as everyone always talks about, the Singapore of the Middle East. The second point I wanted to make is kind of what you were just saying. The immediate response of the American Jewish communal institutions and the Jewish leadership should be, whether we agree or disagree, give us the alternative. What else?
What have they
suggest?
said?
Right.
The institutional response has been.
The AJC has come out against it, calling it bizarre and confusing. The
we
Democratic
go.
majority for Israel have, of course, denounced it.
Yeah.
The ADL put something out, and they were sort of evasive as to what their position was. I think a lot of Jewish organizations sort of want to do a wait-and-see approach because, look, will there be an American acquisition of Gaza? I'm not so convinced there is, but will this be an interesting conversation for the next few months? Probably. And the third
It does
point
a
I wanted
call.
to-
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
third point I wanted to make just quickly is alluding to what you said earlier, which is
Love that.
I agree I agree in a two-state solution. I really do. The problem is I agree in a two-state solution, but I'm also cognizant enough whereby I know that that's not a realistic position in the 21st century. So in an ideal society, when you have two rational actors who are negotiating, there should be a tit for tat. But when you are dealing with a negotiating partner whose starting negotiation is the eradication of the Jew from the river to the sea, it's hard to really subscribe to a position of
If my
coexistence.
grandmother had wheels, she would be a bicycle.
And that's why, going back to this trip, the influencer trip,
Yeah.
it was so hard to hear from people who've experienced trauma we will never be able to imagine
Right.
and still say, we want there to be peace. We want to coexist, because coexistence is a two-way street. You can coexist, and you may want to coexist, but they don't want to coexist. And you know how I know that?
The problem with that is coexist.
Right. The problem is they tried breaking in your door
Yeah.
and kidnapping your daughter. And that's not hyperbole. They literally tried doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm not
And you drove them to the hospital
and
for
you
cancer
drove them
treatment.
to the hospital. And
Before
I'm not
that.
so convinced that you can continue to coexist with people like that. I believe the Palestinians deserve to live in peace and harmony. They should have self-expression, the freedom of movement. And I also believe we can't do any of those things so long as the people they elected, Hamas, is still in power, which is why, for the life of me, I cannot understand the intellectually challenged morons on college campuses who refuse to condemn Hamas, because there is only one power that is detrimental to the freedom and the prosperity of the Palestinian people, and that is Hamas. But they will not condemn them. Instead, they will celebrate them. They will propagate them. They
crazy.
will normalize them. If you care about the Palestinian people, then join humanity, join people of conscience, and call out the terrorists who have subjugated their people for 2 decades, that have built terror infrastructures and tunnels and have weapon caches underneath schools and hospitals and bedrooms.
We know. Here's the thing. Also,
Preaching to the
we
choir.
talk about how, like, look, Israel won these wars that they were wars of aggression against it. Israel won both times. People have to accept that, and for some reason, in Israel's case, people refuse to accept history. But the funny thing is also, if you just zoom out, the Arab world won the Middle East. Blip. Jordan's 60% Palestinian. Then you got Lebanon, Syria, all the surrounding countries. It's funny to think about Israel as the victor when it lives in a neighborhood that's mostly Arab. And yet, like, I always find that interesting that I don't think that point gets driven home on us. I know we say, like, Israel's size of New Jersey, whatever, but when you think about who's tipping the scale in the Middle East, just zoom out, and it's kind of interesting that you have Jordan. People say there's already a Palestinian state. It's called Jordan. And for the size of Israel, if now we're thinking outside the box, Egypt, Jordan, the countries that caused the 67 war, the 48 war, bearing no responsibility to resettle people who are the victims of it as refugees. And I know the pro-Palestine side doesn't accept that premise, but who cares? In other words, there's never a conversation about the regimes and the countries that perpetuated the wars of extermination against Israel to be responsible for the refugees that came as a result of it. And now we're pushing that conversation.
Yeah, at the very least, whether or not they stay in Gaza, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
But like now we're having that conversation. You're forced to ask those questions. I also think when they go back to the negotiating table now, a victory they can bring back to their people, Hamas, is that, hey, we're staying in Gaza, which was
That's
before
always Trump's
was the
tactic.
taken. Right,
Yeah.
right.
There can be no solution to the Gaza conflict, to the war in the Middle East, to just peace in the region, unless that solution requires the total dismantlement of Hamas. And that's why I'm somewhat encouraged with the Trump administration, because yes, leaving aside the whole rebuilding Gaza, or the American army is going to take over Gaza, I don't know. But what I am encouraged is the fact that there seems to be this unanimous opinion. Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Mike Huckabee, of course, that Hamas will not rule the Gaza Strip. How will that happen? That's a fair question. But everyone agrees that this cannot continue. I don't think you will see an Israel of October 6th again. It's just not possible.
Right.
One last point. Like, as a Jew, to see the president of the United States sitting next to the Israeli prime minister, like so emphatically, like offensively defending the Jewish state was like really quite a moment to see.
And he pushes in Bibi's chair for
yeah,
him.
no qualifications, no nothing. Just like,
and they made a media post about it. They did a social media. Our great countries have come together with the music. It was beautiful.
It was,
There is something to
My
be
daughter's
said.
Jewish. I didn't plan it that way, but I'm glad it happened.